The room pulsed with gold light and polished lies. I was pinning a misplaced name tag onto a board member's tux jacket when I caught the first sideways glance, tight-lipped, like a man swallowing a complaint about the wine, but deciding I wasn't worth the breath. That was the third glance I'd clocked in 10 minutes. The first had come when I'd handed the CFO the corrected compliance letter. I'd spent 2 hours rewriting backstage in heels that could kill a raccoon. The second, when the CEO raised his glass and didn't nod at me, even though it was my last-minute magic that got the European delegation past customs in time to attend. It was supposed to be a victory lap. Our annual gala was the kind of corporate mating ritual that cost more than most folks' mortgages, rented chandeliers, crab claws flown in from 3 time zones, and a jazz band so expensive they didn't smile. I had landed the European Acquisition's final regulatory clearance that morning. No PR fanfare, no curtain call, just me in a stairwell at 7:43 a.m., on a call with a stone-faced woman from the Federal Review Board, nudging her signature across the finish line with a voice as smooth as the bourbon I wouldn't get to drink later. That's what I did. I made things vanish. Risk, noise, obstacles. I made deals possible by making myself invisible. But that night, for once, I let myself stand near the light. I'd earned it. Except the light turned cold. Now, if you've made it this far into the story, take a second to tap that subscribe button and throw a like my way. 90% of y'all forget, and I get it. Stories like these feel like gossip you overheard in a parking lot. But every tap keeps the caffeine flowing for the team behind this madness. Anyway, I first noticed the CFO whispering to HR during dessert. I know the look of a man asking a woman to help him ruin someone quietly. And I know the look of a woman pretending to hesitate before she says yes. The crab claws tasted like pennies after that. Every other exec kept touching their cufflinks or fiddling with their lanyards, like something itchy was crawling up their sleeves. One of the partners from legal avoided me so aggressively, he almost reversed into a caterer with a tray of tiramisu. The theme for the gala was Vision Forward. You know, a vague, expensive slogan slapped onto banners with Helvetica bold and helium balloons. The same slogan they printed on the coffee mugs in our onboarding kits. Irony doesn't hit you in the teeth until you realize you're not part of the vision. You're just the cleanup crew. Photographer asked to take a solo shot of me by the orchid wall, probably because he'd seen me run the place like an air traffic controller on Adderall. I smiled, one hand on my hip. Flash. Somewhere behind the camera, I heard someone say she won't need that for LinkedIn much longer. The worst part? That wasn't even the punch. That was the rim shot. As I walked past the CFO on my way out, he gave me a nod like I was a service elevator. Polite, mechanical, functioning, something to be bypassed on the way to the rooftop. By midnight, the jazz band packed up their silent horns and the crab claws began their slow journey to the dumpster behind the hotel. I stood outside in the loading dock under a flickering light and watched one of the interns puke into a bush between Uber pickups. I took off my heels. My toes were bleeding through the nylons. I laughed quietly. The kind of laugh that has teeth in it. They didn't know it yet, but they'd just sent a woman with her finger on the detonator out into the night barefoot, and I already had the trigger tucked in my purse. The meeting invite came at 7:14 a.m. Subject line, quick sync HR, no context, no agenda, just one of those bloodless summons that smells like a hospital hallway. I was still peeling off the adhesive from last night's event badge when it popped up on my phone. 15 years at Lorison, and they give me a calendar ping like I'm a temp who borrowed someone's access card. I showed up to conference room 5B at 9 o'clock on the dot, just like they taught us in orientation back, when the carpet was still green and the logo had serifs. HR was already there, Meredith, the director of People Ops, sipping a green smoothie like she'd just finished yoga instead of sharpening a knife. Sitting beside her was Jonah. That's when I knew. Jonah, who I'd trained when he didn't know the difference between an NDA and an HVAC form. Jonah, who once cried in the stairwell because a VP had called his spreadsheet adorable. Jonah, whose favorite phrase in meetings was piggybacking off that, and who had piggybacked his way straight into the seat across from me, trying not to make eye contact as his foot jittered under the table. Thanks for coming in, Helen, Meredith began, all faux warmth and weaponized vowels. We've been evaluating org alignment across the compliance vertical and believe it's time for strategic realignment. Strategic realignment. That's HR code for, we've decided your usefulness is threatening. She continued, effective immediately, your role will be redefined under the risk division, reporting to Jonah. We see this as an opportunity to streamline decision-making and elevate emerging leadership. Jonah smiled like a boy offered the keys to a ride he didn't know how to drive. Of course, your title will adjust to reflect the transition. You'll no longer be a signatory officer, but your institutional knowledge is still deeply valued. I didn't say a word. Not when she said redefined, not when she said no longer, not even when Jonah cleared his throat like he was about to offer a sorry that you're being publicly dismembered platitude. Instead, I looked down at the manila folder in my lap, the one I'd packed 4 months ago. contingency protocols, escrow terms, personal contacts, my signed but undated resignation letter, and one document they didn't know existed. I had seen the signs back in Q2, the way legal looped me out of deal reviews I used to lead, the C-suite huddles that stopped when I walked past, the new CRM system they rolled out with zero training for my team, only for me to find a sandbox login buried in its access logs, labeled Internal Migration John D. That morning, I watched as Meredith read from a script she'd probably practiced in front of her standing desk. Behind her, the printer was still warming up, spitting out my revised org chart with all the grace of a fax machine having a seizure. My email access was already throttled. I couldn't open SharePoint. Slack logged me out mid-meeting. Somewhere, someone in IT was flipping switches while HR smiled through their friendly ambush. I nodded once. Not because I agreed, but because I refused to let them see me flinch. I asked no questions. I signed nothing. Meredith handed me a glossy folder with New Horizons printed in cheerful blue across the front, as if this was a spiritual retreat and not a lobotomy. The folder hit the bottom of my tote with a thud. "You okay?" Jonah asked, as if that was a normal thing to say after a corporate mugging. "I'm fine," I said. "Just wondering what color tie you'll wear when this place catches fire." He blinked. Meredith shifted in her seat, eyebrows twitching. "Helen, we really hope you'll approach this with openness. Change can be an opportunity." I smiled. "That's true. Just depends on who's holding the matches." I left the room before they could respond, walked straight to my desk, and opened my personal laptop under the pretense of transferring files. What I was really doing was submitting something far more elegant and far more explosive. But that's for the next part. That morning I wasn't angry. Not yet. I wasn't even sad. Just emptied out. Like someone had scooped the warmth out of my chest and left only facts behind. And facts were something I was very, very good at weaponizing. There's a kind of clarity that only arrives after humiliation. A stillness that kicks in once the adrenaline's gone and you're just floating above the wreckage, watching everyone sweep up the mess they made with a plastic spoon. I sat at my kitchen table that night, still in my work slacks and a blouse I no longer respected, typing my resignation like I was filling out a warranty return. One page. No adjectives. No nostalgia. No thank you for the opportunity garbage. Just clean lines, legally airtight. Bulletproof. I didn't even cry. That part surprised me. The house was too quiet. No radio, no dishwasher humming in the background, just the faint buzz of the fridge and the occasional pop of my knuckles. It felt like sitting in the control room of a missile silo, because I wasn't quitting, not really. I was arming something. You see, years ago, back when Lorison first began its courtship with foreign capital, I helped build the pre-acquisition compliance framework. It was a stitched-together monstrosity of legal strings, risk disclosures, EU regulatory harmonizations, and Federal Review Board filings. The kind of stuff executives nod along to but never read. That framework became the company's secret weapon, tight enough to pass scrutiny, flexible enough to bend when money needed to move quickly. But buried deep inside that framework, beneath sections about continuity obligations and role-specific approvals, was a clause called the Delayed Separation Impact Declaration. Form 14B. A technical footnote most folks never touch, let alone understand. It was created to prevent companies from swapping out compliance officers like light bulbs 2 seconds before closing a massive deal. Think of it like a tripwire. If triggered, it forces a mandatory 90-day review of any pre-approval authorizations tied to the original officer. In plain English, if someone with clearance gets demoted, reassigned, or disappears before the ink is dry, everything grinds to a halt. It's obscure, rare, and devastating. I tucked it into our compliance playbook years ago as a just-in-case. Never thought I'd use it myself. But that night I found it, pulled it up, entered the effective date of my role change, specified the trigger as a structural reassignment impacting regulatory authority, uploaded supporting documentation. And then, without ceremony, I filed it with the Federal Regulatory Board's secure portal at 11:38 p.m. It was done, irrevocable. I didn't need fireworks. The silence afterward was louder. Then I opened a new browser tab and attached my resignation letter, addressed to the CFO, CCing HR and legal. Subject, Notice of Resignation, Helen Moraine. I didn't send it, not yet. Let them have a normal morning before the cracks started forming in their glass walls. I took a shower, packed a small box of desk items, my dad's old watch, the mug with the chipped handle, my external drive. I left the team building award from 2018 in the drawer. Let Jonah keep that illusion. Sleep never came. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, replaying every moment from the past 2 months with brutal clarity. The offhand remarks, the last-minute meeting reschedules, the new junior hire who mysteriously copied legal on emails meant for me. They thought I was just a cog, a quiet woman in kitten heels who would fade into the background while they wrote their names across the deal's success. What they never understood is I wasn't part of the deal. I was the deal, and I'd just pulled the pin. At 6:17 the next morning, I clicked send on my resignation. No emojis, no drama, just the final breath before the walls started to shake. Tuesday, 9 o'clock a.m. They called it the quarterly risk alignment briefing, but really it was a poorly disguised panic huddle. I wasn't in the room, obviously. I wasn't even in the building. But the beauty of corporate vanity is that no one ever remembers who set up the Zoom accounts or who holds admin permissions for the company's cloud recordings. Spoiler, it was me, so I watched. From the comfort of my kitchen, wrapped in a flannel robe and sipping bitter French roast out of a mug labeled World's Quietest Threat, I queued up the live stream like I was tuning into a slow-motion car crash. And I was not disappointed. The junior execs fidgeted in their seats, each one trying to look like they weren't the ones about to publicly embarrass themselves. Greg from compliance, who once asked me if GDPR was that new server software, opened with a slide deck that still had my original formatting. The watermark with my initials in the bottom right corner, still there. They hadn't even bothered to change the slide transitions. Same purple gradient, same animations. Watching them trip over my work felt like seeing toddlers try to operate a backhoe. Per the Model 4C framework, Greg began, already sweating, our due diligence metrics align with the adjusted thresholds proposed in the he blinked. In the Helen schema, he actually said it, on the call. Helen schema, like I was a hurricane they'd forgotten to board the windows for. Silence. Then came the voice of one of the European partners, the lead from the acquiring firm. Thick accent, clinical tone, excuse me. Can you clarify what the Helen schema is? And who authored it? Greg's eyes darted to the CFO, who, God bless his botoxed forehead, didn't flinch. Helen Moraine, she was our previous compliance officer. She's currently on, extended leave, extended leave. You'd think I was in Bali with a yoga instructor named Sven, instead of watching his career slowly disintegrate on a 14-inch screen. Another voice chimed in from the investment group's end. American this time, less patient. Was this schema formally transitioned to her replacement? Is there documentation of approval continuity? Cue awkward throat clearing. No one answered. Greg clicked nervously, skipping 3 slides ahead by accident. The screen filled with a flowchart they clearly didn't understand, one I'd built myself with conditional triggers they'd never learned to update. One of the triggers, linked directly to Form 14B, which of course was now live. That little box in the corner of the chart, labeled trigger equals role reassignment pre-close right arrow restart approval cycle. They didn't mention it, probably didn't even see it. But I did. And so did the investors. The silence that followed was the kind that makes teeth itch. I could practically smell the CFO's cologne through the screen, one of those synthetic alpha scents that smells like pine trees dipped in debt. He leaned forward and chuckled. We're navigating a minor handoff process. Nothing to worry about. The documentation is sound. Our legal team is in sync with transition protocols. I almost applauded. That's what you say when you're lying in front of people who haven't realized they're being lied to. Yet, one of the analysts tried to steer the meeting back on track with a canned question about cyber liability. Bless his heart, but the damage was done. You could feel the momentum dying in real time. Eyes glancing sideways, mics going quiet, cameras mysteriously cutting off. I closed the window before the meeting ended. I'd seen enough. In the span of 30 minutes, they'd proven exactly what I knew. They couldn't run my system. Not well, not fast, and certainly not cleanly. They thought I was gone, but I was still everywhere, every spreadsheet, every clause, every contact number embedded in the master approval table. They could scrub my name off the door, but I'd built the building, and the foundation was groaning. I didn't feel giddy or smug, just affirmed, detached satisfaction, like watching mold creep across a wall you already moved out of. Let someone else clean it, you warned them. I opened a new tab, checked the filing status on my 14B. Approved, under review, all flags raised. The cracks had started, and all I had to do now was wait. The first call came at 8:42 a.m. while I was buttering a piece of burnt toast and listening to my neighbor yell at his dog through the drywall. Blocked number, no voicemail, just the dull hum of a line that didn't want to be traced. I didn't answer. 2 minutes later, another call, blocked again, then again. At 8:47, persistent little gnats. I let it ring while I sipped my coffee and opened the window to let the October air snake through the curtains. I watched the skyline shimmer above the city like a lie told with enough confidence to pass for gospel. At 8:53, the text came. It was from Andrea, the analyst I'd mentored 3 summers ago. Smart, awkward, too honest for her own good. She once cried because legal had buried a risk clause in 6-point font and no one else had read it. I liked her. Her message was short, they're panicking. The acquiring firm wants your signature on something. Nobody can explain your exit. CFO looks like he aged 10 years overnight. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, smiling faintly. Then I typed back, not my circus, not my monkeys, and put the phone down, no punctuation, no emojis, just a clean severing. I imagined the boardroom, those glass walls now fogged with flop sweat. Jonah flipping through the binder like a man trying to find the exit in a choose-your-own-adventure novel. Meredith from HR probably stammering her way through a "we value continuity" monologue, while the European investors sat across the table in ice-cold silence. And the CFO? he'd be pressing his phone to his ear, whispering my name like a prayer to a god he never respected. The thing is, they didn't just need my signature, they needed me. The approval clause required that the same regulatory officer be enrolled through to close. The 14B filing turned my exit into a live minefield. No replacement, no workaround, no loophole. And now, they had investors asking questions and lawyers demanding clean paper trails, all of which pointed to one fatal oversight. They assumed I'd go quietly. They assumed wrong. A few minutes after Andrea's text, I opened my email. 52 new messages. Most were auto-forwarded updates, compliance alerts still linked to my credentials. But buried in the thread was something from an internal domain, a scanned copy of a retroactive authorization addendum, with my name forged in the signature block. Amateurs. They hadn't even used the right font. My real signature uses Garam and 11 point, not Arial. I'd trained that into every document standard. They'd faked my approval using the corporate template. Lazy, desperate, I didn't respond. I didn't call Andrea back. I didn't forward the forgery to legal yet. Instead, I pulled up a window and stared out at the Lorison building. 18 floors of glass, arrogance, and expensive coffee machines. My old office sat dark behind tinted windows. Stripped of the nameplate but still lit by the security light I'd asked facilities to install myself. I felt no urge to go back, no nostalgia, no rage, just amusement, cold and flickering like a candle in an empty boardroom. They were finally realizing the shape of the hole I left behind, not a vacancy, a breach. And the more they scrambled, the more visible my absence became. That's the thing about silent systems. When they fail, they don't explode, they unravel. And I was already watching the first threads come loose. The boardroom was too quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from focus or respect, the kind that comes right after someone steps on a landmine, and everyone's waiting to see if the leg is still attached. The CFO, Mark Trenton, sat at the head of the polished walnut table like a man trying to look bigger than the hole beneath him. His tie was looser than usual. No jacket. His sleeves were rolled like he wanted people to believe he'd been in the trenches, when in reality, he was watching the walls collapse from a leather chair. Across from him sat the two lead reps from the acquiring firm, Reinhardt Capital. They'd flown in from Frankfurt 3 days early, supposedly for final walkthroughs and champagne toasts. Now, their briefcases sat unopened, and the room smelled like panic filtered through citrus air freshener. Then came the line that shifted the entire atmosphere. "We're missing a signature," said Martin Lowell, Lorison's own general counsel, reading from a red-line printout like it had personally betrayed him. CFO didn't flinch. "Helen, we've got her documentation on file." Everything was transitioned before her departure. Martin didn't look up. No, not a documentation trail, a continuity signature. One of the Germans cleared his throat. "Your framework included a rider. Regulatory clearance officer must remain enrolled through to transaction close. Continuity clause, section 9B. The second rep flipped open his binder and slid the page across. Highlighted, annotated, time-stamped. Martin adjusted his glasses, blinking too much. I wasn't aware that rider was final. The German nodded, clipped. "It was. Your team included it in the January revisions. We flagged it in March. Was it not escalated?" CFO leaned forward, trying to conjure the bluff he usually reserved for investors too stupid to understand burn rates. "Look, we had an internal reorg." Helen's responsibilities were fully transitioned to Jonah. "With respect," the German interrupted, "this is not about internal transitions. The clause is explicit. Demotion or removal triggers noncompliance. Your officer of record, Miss Moraine, was removed. She did not authorize a replacement. You require reclearance." Mark smiled the way a drowning man might while pretending the water's warm. "Come on, this is a procedural hiccup. You know how bloated these filings get. We will need to reassess risk," said the other rep, colder than concrete. "Effective immediately." Every eye turned to Mark, who suddenly looked very small beneath the recessed lighting. The glossy investor packets on the table felt like props in a bad play, talking points for a deal that had just slipped sideways. No one spoke, and Martin tried to break the tension with an appeal to logic. "Surely there's a remedy clause, a workaround?" Jonah's been operating under Helen's framework. The documents, the German raised a hand. "Compliance is not subjective. You wrote the clause, now it applies." It hit Mark then, I think, that awful moment when a man realizes the trap was his own design, that Helen hadn't created the bomb, she just left the pin on his desk. He looked down at his notes, and at the empty chair Helen used to occupy in these meetings. For the first time, it wasn't just vacant, it was loud. Loud in the way a severed wire crackles. Loud in the way silence becomes evidence. One of the junior analysts tried to whisper something to legal, got shut down with a single shake of the head. There was no spin here, no workaround, no Jonah-shaped scapegoat. They demoted the one person whose approval mattered. And that act, impulsive, cowardly, arrogant, had invalidated the very deal they were betting the company's future on. Mark swallowed hard. "Can we reach out to her? Re-engage, even temporarily?" The Germans exchanged a look. "You may try," one of them said, tone flat, "but our confidence is affected." The word hung in the air like a sword over the neck of a traitor. Affected. Which, in this business, is a kiss of death. The meeting ended without a handshake. The Reinhardt team left the room with their folders still sealed and their jaws tight. They didn't slam the door, but they didn't have to. Mark sat back, exhaled slowly, and stared at the screen where Helen's old file still blinked open, waiting for someone authorized to hit submit. But there was no one left, and the clock was ticking. They found it at 3:14 p.m. on a Thursday, buried in the outgoing compliance registry, logged under federal disclosures, timestamped executions. A junior associate from legal named Priya stumbled on it while combing through the digital archive, trying to find something that would unjam the clogged pipeline of approvals Reinhardt had suddenly frozen. It was a PDF, 7 pages, standard government formatting, dry, dense, and devastating. Form 14B Delayed Separation Impact Declaration, submitted by Helen Moraine. Title at time of submission: Regulatory Clearance Officer, timestamp, 11:38 p.m., the night before resignation. Trigger event, reassignment of duties pre-close. The final section was the kill shot, pursuant to Federal Compliance Framework 7.3, and in alignment with pre-approved continuity protections. This filing mandates a 90-day reapproval window for any deal contingent upon prior clearance issued by the declarant, should their role or title be altered prior to transaction close. Translated from bureaucrat, the whole acquisition was now legally iced. The document made its way up the chain fast. Priya flagged it, Martin from legal forwarded it, and by 3:47 p.m. it was glowing on the CFO's laptop like a detonation report. Nobody said a word, because there it was, the clause nobody read, the clause they had approved. The clause Helen had warned about 3 fiscal calendars ago in a buried internal memo titled Continuity Protocol Safeguards Against Premature Transition. Nobody had clicked it. Nobody cared until now. The CFO sat motionless, eyes scanning the page like he could will the font to change. Martin just stood there, arms folded, waiting for someone else to take the blame. "You knew about this?" Mark asked him, voice dry. Martin shook his head. "She slipped it in under a subsection during last year's audit refresh. We all signed off." "Jesus Christ," Mark muttered. "Actually," Martin replied, "it's genius." That word landed like a slap, because it was. It was genius. Quiet, brutal genius. Helen had wired the foundation of their entire merger with a regulatory landmine, then stepped back and watched them dance. And she didn't have to scream, didn't have to leak emails or post cryptic rants on LinkedIn. All she had to do was trust the system, the very system she'd built with her own 2 hands. The board was notified by 5 o'clock. Emergency call. Flat voices. One question: can we salvage the deal within the quarter? The answer came in clinical tones from Reinhardt's side. No. Their investors had tied the valuation to a Q for close. Any delay reset the model, triggered performance penalties, and opened the door to renegotiation or withdrawal. Everything hinged on that window. And now, thanks to Form 14B, that window was bolted shut with reinforced steel. They tried to scramble, tried to piece together a petition to expedite reclearance. But the review board doesn't move for panic. It moves for protocol. And protocol said 90 days, no exceptions, not for timelines, not for ego, and certainly not for men who thought restructure was just a polite way to erase inconvenient women. No press release followed. No internal memo went out. Just a slow, stunned silence that crept through every floor like mold in the ductwork. Clients started asking questions. Partners delayed calls. Analysts whispered in Slack threads. From my new office, 12 floors up, same building, better coffee, I watched the Reinhardt team cancel 3 back-to-back bookings in Laurison's boardroom. The investment that had been a sure thing now sat dead in a locked folder labeled contingent review, and no one could touch it. I didn't celebrate, didn't clink glasses or cue up dramatic music. I just stared at the blinking cursor on my screen and opened the same file that had flipped their entire future upside down. I had filed it like a closing statement. And now, like I always told my team, the system doesn't forget. It just waits for the right trigger. They say the first sound of a deal dying isn't a bang, it's the ringtone of desperation. Mark Trenton, our CFO, made 16 phone calls in under 2 hours. No one picked up. Not legal, not his assistant, not even Jonah, who had apparently taken sick leave the moment the 14B filing was discovered. Half the compliance team went dark. The other half was fielding frantic pings from investors wondering why Reinhardt's flight back to Frankfurt had been moved up without warning. The first real crack came not from inside, but from the outside. Reinhardt issued a formal notice at 9:02 a.m. the next morning. It was cold, German, in the most surgical sense. A 3-sentence email with zero emotion and maximal impact. In light of recent disclosures and regulatory uncertainty introduced by role reassignments at Laurison Group, Reinhardt Capital will be withdrawing from the acquisition process, effective immediately. This decision is final. We wish you success in future endeavors. It hit the C-suite like a glass of ice water to the face. They tried spinning it. Temporary pause. Exploratory re-engagement. You can't put glitter on a corpse. Someone, probably Andrea, leaked the internal call transcript between Mark and one of the Reinhardt managing partners. It circulated like wildfire through encrypted Slack threads and burner phones. The line that stuck out, the one that made even the receptionists whisper, "Call her back. I don't care what it takes. Offer her advisory. Offer her naming rights to the damn company. Just fix this." But by then, I wasn't answering calls. I wasn't answering anything. They'd made their choice the day they handed Jonah my chair and smiled while doing it. They'd assumed I'd take it like a good little ghost, fade, nod, vanish. Instead, I became a watermark on every system they couldn't scrub clean. A shadow that kept showing up in version histories and audit logs. A legal trigger they'd written but never respected. Now, I was the reason the deal that would have secured their bonuses, their board seats, their smug LinkedIn posts lay in smoking ruins. The board convened an emergency meeting that Friday. No catered lunch, no smiling interns, just 12 men and women in a glass room with sweaty brows and too many questions. Every presentation slide still bore my original formatting. My notes, my risk matrices, my continuity schema, my name over and over and over again. Helen Moraine Compliance Lead, Helen Moraine Regulatory Flowchart, Helen Moraine Final Writer Approvals, Helen Moraine Signature ID on Section 14B. Mark tried to open the meeting with some semblance of dignity. Cleared his throat, mumbled something about unexpected regulatory headwinds. Someone interrupted. "What's our contingency plan?" Silence. Another voice. "Why wasn't the 14B flagged earlier?" Mark tried to respond but choked halfway through a sentence. A third voice cut in. "Who signed off on the reassignment without legal review?" The CEO, the same man who'd clapped me on the shoulder 2 galas ago and called me indispensable, rubbed his eyes like he was trying to erase the last month. "We need a name," he finally muttered. "Someone has to explain this." No one moved, no one spoke, because the truth was I'd already explained it. In filings, in memos, in meeting notes nobody read. In the system they treated like a suggestion instead of the backbone of their entire house of cards. They tried to push me out of the story. Instead, I became the ending. And now, there they sat, staring at a wall of slides that said the same thing, louder than any confession. You shouldn't have underestimated her. The final slide was a dashboard projection of post-acquisition revenue trajectories. It had a footnote. Forecast assumes Q4 close. Underneath it, someone had scribbled in red pen, "Invalid, C14B." I didn't write it, but I didn't have to. The system was speaking for me now. The elevator dinged at the 31st floor, sleeker carpeting, cooler air, the kind of silence that came not from discomfort but intention. Up here, nobody needed to shout to prove they were in charge. The door opened and I stepped out, heels clicking across marble that hadn't yet been scuffed by panic. The conference room was all glass and understatement. No flashy logos, no inspirational quotes stenciled on the walls. Just precision, German, surgical, efficient. The partners from Reinhardt Capital stood as I entered. They didn't ask me for ID. They didn't ask where I'd come from. They already knew. Miss Moraine, the senior partner, said, extending his hand. His English was flawless, but the cadence still carried the weight of finality. "Thank you for joining us." I shook his hand, firm, unapologetic. Another partner gestured to the chair at the head of the table. "We've prepared your advisory brief. Your insights into U.S. regulatory pathways and your understanding of how leadership misinterprets continuity protections will be invaluable to our next acquisition." I nodded, didn't need to gloat. I was past that. They weren't hiring me for revenge. They were hiring me because I knew where the traps were buried and how to walk through a minefield without blinking. They offered me a better view, a higher floor, a clearer purpose. And not once did they ask me what had happened at Lorison, because professionals don't need gossip. They see the shape of silence and recognize who carved it. The meeting lasted under 20 minutes. Just signatures, just smiles, just execution. As I stepped into my new office, just 2 floors above the one they'd once stripped me from, I saw the movers down below. Cardboard boxes stacked like tombstones. A nameplate peeking from the top of one labeled Moraine H. I didn't wave, just set my espresso on the windowsill and watched. The same skyline, the same sun, the same building, but the view was mine now because they made me invisible, and I made myself irreplaceable. Thanks for watching, you cubicle warriors. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're my old boss, then you're on your own. Revenge of the Coffee Pot strikes again.